Can you hear me? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully there are lots of people on the web. We have 2 people in the audience. We're custom show for those that showed up in person. But for those that don't know me, my name is Christopher Stevens. I'm one of the supervising engineers with the Division of Financial Assistance at the State Water Board, and we're doing a second webinar on the clean water and drinking water SRF IUPs. So we had done a workshop earlier, April 30th. We had intended to get the IUPs out in the middle of April, which would have given people enough time to review them and formulate questions in advance of the workshop, but we didn't get the clean water IUP out until April 26th, which was Friday, the Friday before the workshop. The workshop was on Tuesday, April 30th. And then we didn't get the drinking water IUP posted until May 6th. So in an effort to give people plenty of time to review those documents and formulate any questions they might have for us, we decided we'd add on a second webinar. So that's where we are today. We're going to do a second webinar and give people an opportunity to ask additional questions. We did get some questions at the first workshop that we did on April 30th, but we wanted to give people plenty of opportunity to ask us questions. And again, both IUPs are scheduled to go to the board for consideration and hopefully adoption on June 18th. So that's what we're working towards. So we weren't necessarily going to go through all the slides as we did during the first workshop. The first workshop was recorded, and that recording is on both the Clean Water and Drinking Water SRF web pages, as well as the presentations that went along with that. We'll go through some of the slides here, kind of want to get to the heart of, the real content of the IUP. So I'm going to skip over some of the initial slides that are kind of background information. Hopefully you folks are generally familiar with both programs, so we will skip over that. But for those of you that are on the web and you want to ask questions, I'll give you the email addresses where you can send questions to. So we're going to do the drinking water SRF IUP first, and so if you have questions on that, send them to drinking water SRF, that's one word, drinking water SRF at waterboards.ca.gov. And so with that, well, for those of you that are here, if you need to use the restroom, go out the door to my left, take your first left, and then the first right is where the restrooms are. So again, my name is Christopher Stevens, supervising engineer with DFA, and some other folks we have here. We have Nicole Morgan, one of my counterparts, another supervising engineer in DFA. We have Win Trin Lay, one of the senior engineers that works with the Drinking Water SRF program. Beth Brown is one of my staff engineers. Bob Pontareri, another senior engineer, works with Clean Water SRF projects. And then Tatiana Gwilin, one of the staff engineers. And then controlling all the video and audio is Elnaz Nasai. She's in the room behind me here. So with that, I think I'm just going to jump in here at kind of as a starting point. Well, let's look at the finances of the program, the Drinking Water SRF, and then we have complementary funds, which is there's a certain amount of principal forgiveness that comes to us from US EPA that we can use, and then there are state bond funds that we also use. We use those complementary to the Drinking Water SRF loan funds. So, of course, in order for us to do anything, finance any projects, whether it be a loan or a grant or loan principal that's forgiven, well, we got to start out with how much money do we have. So what we've been trying to do in both SRF programs over the last several years is look at their capacity on a loan basis as a sustainable loan capacity. We have sold bonds for the Clean Water SRF program for several years. This year we just completed our first Drinking Water SRF bond sale. So we can leverage the loan funds that we have. We've made loans in the past, and when those loans are repaid, we can use that in part. We can loan that out again, but we can also use that to borrow money in the municipal bond market. And so if you look at the sustainable loan capacity of the drinking water SRF program, somewhere about $420 million a year. So that's kind of what we're shooting for on an average basis for loan funds. And then, as I say, we have grant funds as well as principal forgiveness funds that we use in conjunction with those loan funds. Many times communities get just a grant or just loan forgiveness, but sometimes we put those together with loans as well. So if you look at availability, our projected availability for the next year, grant and principal forgiveness, PF stands for principal forgiveness, essentially a grant. It's technically a loan, but you don't have to pay it back, so essentially a grant. So looking at about $215 million. We also have money to protect and treat clean up groundwater. So that can be used in conjunction with the loan program as well. So we've got about $675 million in grant for that. Round 2 concepts were submitted in early 2018, and then my understanding is we'll have additional solicitations in 2019 and or 2020, depending on how 2019 goes. So with that, so one more slide here. So if you look at the IUP, what you're going to see, one of the tables in there is a comprehensive list of all the applications. So we sat down and we compiled what are all the applications in-house that we have, just as a starting point. These are all the folks that are requesting financing from us. So you look at a very long list, over 300 applications at the time this was put together, almost $3 billion, $2.9 billion or thereabouts. A good number of those are existing projects. One of the keys for understanding the IUP, the drinking water IUP, and it's also true for the clean water IUP, is that small, severely disadvantaged and small disadvantaged communities are automatically added to the fundable list. So in other words, they are eligible to receive funding. Now, whether there are funds available for the project, that's a second question, but as a starting point, they're on the fundable list and therefore eligible to compete for funding. So we're already starting out with almost 100 of those applications, $190 million or thereabout. New small severely disadvantaged and new small disadvantaged communities, another 110 we're adding on this year, about $234 million. And then other projects that don't fit into that category, small, severely disadvantaged or small disadvantaged, another 94 projects, that's about $2.4 million. Those are the ones we actually went through and ranked, and so some of those, depending upon where they ranked, may be added to the fundable list and others may not. So as I say, one of the keys to to get funding is to be on the fundable list. If you're a small severely disadvantaged or small disadvantaged community, you automatically go on the fundable list. All the others were ranked in order to be placed on the fundable list. But we did leave a lot of flexibility on the drinking water SRF side. The program is not as oversubscribed as the clean water SRF loan funds are. And so we did leave a lot of flexibility for the deputy director to add a project to the fundable list during the fundable year if it's moving forward. So if other projects aren't moving forward, but there's another project that's not on the fundable list, we can recommend to the deputy director of DFA to add that project to the fundable list. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole. She can talk about disadvantaged communities and that funding.
Hey, thank you, Christopher. I'm Nicole Morgan with the Division of the Division's Office of Sustainable Water Solutions. So we provide grants, principal forgiveness and low interest loans to small disadvantaged and small severely disadvantaged communities. As Christopher said, the applications that come into the office are not scored or ranked. There is an initial eligibility screening that is done by DFA staff to determine the eligibility to make sure that you qualify as a small disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged community. And then that eligibility is rechecked and confirmed prior to receiving funding, and that is done by DFA staff. So small community grant funding. Currently, the demand exceeds the availability of funding. However, that does not mean to not apply. Please apply. Continue to work with us to move through the process because there's a couple of things. One, there may be more funds may become available. The other is that we qualify the applicants for all funding that is available. So if anything that we keep an eye out for anything that may be coming down the line, we make sure that you qualify for it. So when you reach that finish line, you will qualify for the funding that is available at that time. And then also, we primarily fund based on readiness to proceed and availability of funding. And then however, this year, we're also prioritizing construction projects. And now that only means that if there ends up being a planning project and a construction project that reach the finish line at the same time, we would fund the construction project first. We would hold on to that planning project until additional funds become available. And since we've already qualified it for any funds that could be coming down the line, we would then be able to fund that planning project as soon as possible. Oh, wrong way. Okay, so what's the definition of a small disadvantaged community? So it's a community water system that serves less than 3,300 service connections year long and less than or equal 10,000 people. It also has the service area also has a median household income that's less than 80% of the statewide median household income. And then a severely disadvantaged community has a service area that has a MHI that's less than 60% of the statewide median household income. We also have what we define as expanded community water system, small community water system. So that's between 3,300 and 6,600 service connections, or between 10,000 and 20,000 people. And so if your system fits into that category, it may be eligible for some grant or principal forgiveness if it provides water service to a severely disadvantaged community. We also do technical assistance for small DACs and severely disadvantaged communities, and that can include TMF assessments, funding application assessments, rate studies, income surveys, legal assistance. And so you can reach out to us and we can take a look and see if there's additional assistance we can provide through our TA program. So there's also, the IUP also explains what the eligibility criteria is, and that's the maximum grant amount that we can provide per project. And so in short, for planning projects, is up to $500,000. And then on the construction side, it's up to $5 million, with the caveat of the maximum amount per connection is $30,000. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Wynn.
Thank you, Nicole. Hi, I am Yunchen Lei, a senior engineer with the Drinking Water SIF. So today I just want to go over a summary of the fundable list and what new and the process and our implementation schedule. As you can see, we break the fundable list into 4 different groups for small planning versus construction and large, large planning and large construction project. And as you have heard earlier, all of the small DAC and small severely DAC are automatically on the fundable list to compete for funding. And for the non-DAC, we do review the application, rank the project, and prioritize based on their readiness to proceed. And from that process, that's about 50 of those projects that got placed on the fundable list. And the total of fund requested for the project is around 2.6, but the estimate loan that's be requested from these projects at around 1.18 billion. So with the policy amendment that were recently adopted by the board back in February of 2019, what some of the new requirements I just want to go over. So with the recently policy amendment, we increased the debt service coverage for senior and parity from 1.1 to 1.2, while lowering the subordinate coverage to 1 time. And so with the fundable list, as I mentioned earlier, all of the small DAC and small severely DAC project automatically placed on the list. And other projects that not making progress to a financing agreement may be bypassed, so that other projects that are ready to proceed may be added to the list per the director, deputy director of the division. Also, we are currently updating on our website all of the application packages for the drinking waters. The package includes the general application, the technical, financial, and environmental, as well as the instruction. We will send out a license notice when these new information are available on the website. Also, with this year IUP and the amendment, policy amendment, we extend the planning financial term so that the applicant now have the option to request for either 5 years or 10 years term. With construction, the term extended to up to 40 years or useful life of the project for the disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged project, and 30 years for all others. With some change here, we have the loan repayment now will be annual and not semi-annual. So if you are aware, currently the drinking water SRF is building a project semi-annually. But starting with the new loan going forward, it will be an annual. And the first principal and interest payment will be due 12 months after project completion for a non-DAC project, and 18 months for the DAC or severely DAC project. Also, the prepayment now would require the deputy director approval. So with all those new change, what remain the same? We have the match financing available still. The effective rate for a 30-year term now for a match would be at 1.2%. So that is much better than the current rate that the drinking water currently offer for this calendar year is 1.9. And the application process via our online application system still the same. We accept application continuously, and will assist the applicant and review application as they are submitted. Also, just want to point out that the project on the fundable list is not a guarantee of funding. So all of the review still being done, and the project must meet all of the eligibility criteria for funding. So retroactive planning and design eligibility still the same. All of the project planning and design costs remain eligible regardless of when it incurs. So if a project come in for construction funding, all of the sub-costs of retroactive planning and design can be claimed as part of the construction cost. So the our implementation plan the implementation plan for us is to try to execute all of the fundable agreement by June 30th of 2020. And any of the project that not funded will be rolled over to the 2021 list. We will have progress report toward the executing agreements about mid-years. And also monthly, we'll have the application status report updated on website, and any other update, changes or modified to the status will be posted and announced. The schedule going forward would be as we have the drinking water SF IUP posted for a 30-day comment on May 6th, and the deadline to submit written comments is due at noon on June 6th of 2019. And the board meeting is scheduled for June 18 for consideration of the adoption of the IUP, and we'll try to execute agreement for project on a fundable list on June 30th, by June 30th of 2020. So I want to go over some of information on submitting comments. So detail will be on the notice of opportunity to comment, and we have the comments will be subject with the subject line of comments letter June 18, 2019 board meeting for the federal fiscal year 2019 drinking water SF IUP, and be submitted to Janine Townsend, the clerk to the board. So the address is on the screen. If you have a file less than 15 megabytes, then you can submit it via email. If it's greater than 15 megabytes, please fax to the number on the screen there, and or the courier check-in with Cal EBA building to submit, the hard copy. And any oral comments can be provided at the June 18 board meeting. We have a mailbox for question at the workshop today at drinkingwatersf@waterboards.ca.gov. If you anyone have any question about the drinking water SF IUP, we submit the question to that mailbox, and we will be happy to answer the question that you may have. I'll turn it over to Christopher, and we'll checking back with Tatiana to see if we have any question.
But anyway, if we get ready to submit the application, do all the components like environmental and so forth have to be complete prior to submission?
when you submit the application, all of those components don't have to be complete. We normally would prefer that you have a whole complete package, but if you don't, you can submit them as you feel comfortable, ready, and then we will assign a project manager who will reach out to you and help guide you through the process.
Okay, thank you. My other question is, what is the current statewide MHI?
Oh, can you look it up? I think the current MHI right now about 61,000, but we'll look it up. The information also posted on our website.
Okay, I haven't been able to find that, so I appreciate that. Thank you. I think that was all of my questions.
Oh, oh. So Nicole already had the information ready here. So for 2019, the MHI is 67, 169, not 61. Huh? And so with that, 80% of the MHI to be considered for disadvantage is at 53,735 or less. And for to be qualified for severely disadvantaged, it would be at 40,301 or less. You're welcome. Thank you. Very handy.
Any questions?
Yeah, we had a question online. Is there a formal policy of how drinking water SRF projects are prioritized? And why aren't the drinking water SRF projects ranked like clean water SRF?
So there is a formal policy, and it's called the Drinking Water SRF Policy, the implementation policy, and you can find that on the Drinking Water SRF website. And there's a section, it's fairly early on, I don't know whether it's 2 or 3, that talks about the ranking system. Why aren't they the same? Well, there were 2 different programs, they have different objectives, and they were created. The Drinking Water SRF program originally was with the Department of Public Health, so they created a system, and so maybe over time they will get closer together, but yeah, they're really separate programs, so wouldn't really be possible at this point to prioritize them in exactly the same way. Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah.
I know that you're updating forms on the application, on the new forms that are on the application. Do you have any idea when those will be posted? Should we wait for those before we start an application?
So all of those forms, we are, when we say new form, is not really new, it's just like minor change update based on the policy amendment and the IUP. You can, if you're ready to submit, you can use the current form. We anticipate that all of those new package of form will be available around the time that the board adopt this IUP. Which is around June 18, so we're trying to have them all ready and posted about the same time.
All right, why don't we, we'll regroup here and we'll start with the Clean Water SRF. Now, certainly, if there are other questions, I think we'll have plenty of time here. It's only not even 1:30, so we had scheduled this from 1 to 3. So if those of you out there that have questions on the drinking water IUP, we'll have more than enough time, I think, to answer those if you haven't thought of them up yet. So why don't we regroup and we'll do the clean water IUP. So again, we're not going to go through all of the slides. The introductory slides are kind of background on the program. But again, if you have questions, cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov, cleanwatersrf as one word. And so I'm just going to jump in here as we were talking about the Drinking Water SRF program. In order to do what we do, we have to start out, well, how much money do we have to do those things? So the financial outlook for the clean water side of the programs, again, as with the Drinking Water SRF, we're trying to look at the Clean Water SRF program, at least from a loan perspective, as a sustainable program. What is a sustainable financing level on an average basis? We're not saying that that's either a floor or a ceiling, just kind of an average target. We know it's going to be higher some years, lower some years. So for the Clean Water SRF loan capacity, about $1 billion per year. And as with the Drinking Water SRF program, we have funds that complement the loan funds, grant and principal forgiveness funds. So if you look at that, not quite as much available there on the clean water side for small community grants. That would include grants and principal forgiveness. About $78 million is our projection. Water recycling funding program. Water recycling projects are eligible for the Clean Water SRF program, so we use state funds, state bond funds in conjunction with the Clean Water SRF program. Currently, we have some funds still left over from Proposition 1. We've got about almost $9 million in grant and about $105 million in loan. Proposition 68 funds, there was some money in Proposition 68 that is in the budget, and so depending upon if the budget is approved, those numbers would increase a little bit, about $49 million in grant and about $137 million in loan. We also have some Proposition 1 stormwater grant funds, about $96 million. Stormwater is also an eligible clean water type project. Final solicitation, I understand, is in early 2019. And then Proposition 1 groundwater funds, those can also be used in conjunction with the Clean Water SRF funds. As I said earlier, about $675 million in grant. Round 2 concepts was in early 2018, and then additional solicitations in 2019 or 2020. So as with the Drinking Water SRF program, we put together a comprehensive list of applications. Some pretty big numbers here. About over 250 projects, over $7 billion in financing requests. As with the Drinking Water SRF program, there is a fundable list. You have to be on the fundable list. There was always a fundable list with the Drinking Water SRF. Fundable list concept is new for the Clean Water program. This year, 2018, 2019 was the first year that we had a fundable list on the clean water side. So we have a fundable list. We're starting with that and then adding additional projects onto the fundable list. So there's already, when we put this together a couple of months ago, there was already 77 projects requesting almost $1.5 billion. So those are rolling over to the next year automatically. Again, new, small, severely disadvantaged, and small disadvantaged community projects, again, automatically added to the fundable list. Whether there's funds, separate question, but automatically added to the fundable list, so they can be fundable. Another 70 projects, $165 million or thereabouts. Projects subject to scoring, so this is new for this year, is we did institute a scoring system. The board approved that in November of last year. So we had almost 100 projects requesting over $5 billion. They were put through the scoring process, and Bob will talk more in detail about how that process was done and the results of that process. And then there were a dozen or so projects that they knew they weren't going to score very well, so they said, okay, well, we'll wait until next year's fundable list. But we kept them on the comprehensive list. So again, fundable list, you have to be on the fundable list. Only a project on the fundable list is fundable, can receive funding. As I say, loan demand greatly exceeds. You can see, over $5 billion that people are requesting. There was already $1.5 billion on the fundable list. So this year we did go through a scoring and ranking process that we'll talk about in more detail. And we're trying to shoot for a funding list that's somewhere between 90 and 125% of that sustainable loan capacity. So in other words, somewhere between 900 million and 1.25 billion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nicole. She can talk about disadvantaged communities.
Okay, thank you, Christopher. So on the clean water side for small disadvantaged communities, a lot of the information is very similar that it is on the drinking water side. As Christopher said, the applications are automatically placed on the fundable list. They are not scored and ranked. An initial eligibility screening is conducted by DFA staff, and the eligibility is rechecked and confirmed prior to funding. That's also being done by DFA staff. Once again, the demand exceeds the current funding available. That does not mean to not apply. Please still apply. Continue to work with us. We qualify the applications for all available funding sources, and we fund based on readiness to proceed and the availability of funding. And so right now, we're also prioritizing construction projects. That doesn't mean that we're not funding any planning projects. It only means that, once again, if the planning and the construction project get to the end of the line at the same time, we'll fund the construction project first. We'll hold on to the planning project and fund it once additional funds become available. So this is a little bit different. The definition for a small community for clean water is less than 20,000 people. The MHI thresholds remain the same. For a disadvantaged community, is less than 80% the median household income, and severely disadvantaged communities are less than 60% the median household income. The planning grant eligibility, this is a little bit different. The population is based on the 20,000, and then qualify as a small disadvantaged community, you get 100%, and the maximum grant is 500,000. Part of the difference here is that on the clean water side, that 500 is part of the maximum overall grant available. So if 500,000 was spent here, that 500,000 would be subtracted from the amount of grant that's available under construction. So for construction, this is broken up more than it is on the drinking water side. So meeting the population requirements, and then if the MHI is between 180% is statewide MHI, and wastewater rates are greater than 4%, the system could be eligible up to 50% of the project costs. If it's a small DAC meeting the less than 8% the statewide MHI, and wastewater rates are greater than equal 1.5%, the percent eligible project costs increase to 75%. And then for small, severely disadvantaged communities, 100% of the project is eligible. All of these is up to $6 million in grant with a maximum cost of per household of $30,000. So then we also have another table within the IUP for septic to sewer projects, and for regional projects. We understand that these projects are very important. They're also more costly. So we allow up to $8 million per grant per project on septic to sewer and regional projects, and with the maximum household cost per household per project of $75,000. Let's see here. So just one other note is that there's also Proposition 1 groundwater funding that may be available for septic to sewer projects if the community is a small disadvantaged community, and also has groundwater sampling showing that there is degradation to groundwater. So continue to work with our staff if we see that the project is also eligible for groundwater funding, we will qualify it and work with the staff under that program to make sure that it qualifies for both funding sources and that it can receive the maximum amount of grant that is available. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Pontieri.
Okay, my name is Bob Pontieri. I'm the senior engineer with the SWRCB program, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the scoring and how we ended up ranking projects. So a score is composed of three components. There's a primary score, a readiness score, a secondary score, and a readiness score. So the primary score is really based on water quality conditions. The secondary score is based on applicant or project features. And the readiness score is just as it sounds. It's based on when we expect people to be ready to go to construction and use the cash. So there's a maximum score of 16. So what we had to do was develop a cutoff score. And so we ended up grouping projects all together. Projects that had the same score were grouped into groupings. And you were either fundable or you were not fundable, depending on how it broke out. We also went to partial funding to increase the amount of projects that we ended up putting into the list. So this is the overall process that we went through. So as you can see by the slide, we basically received all the information from the applicants, compiled them together in our worksheets. We actually sent the applicants the worksheets to come to concurrence on the scoring. Once they came back in, we worked to compile and analyze all the information. We drafted up a list, which is more or less where we are at this stage. It's out for public review. We're going to be addressing comments on the overall IUP now, and the board will be adopting the IUP at the June 18th meeting. So this slide represents the different scenarios that we looked at. So scenario A, well, we had a cutoff score of 16. You notice that we had no projects there. And then when we looked at A, which was everybody that had a cutoff score of 15, we only had one, so obviously that wasn't enough projects, because like Christopher had stated, we're trying to stay between 900 million and 1.25 billion. So when we went to B and we got to a cutoff score of 14, you can see that that put us at our limit. But if you notice, the number of projects was really low. It was only 10 projects. And we didn't think that that would be an acceptable result. So we went to some other options. So option C, with everybody that had a cutoff score of 13, you'll notice that we were allowed to keep it at the 1.25 billion, which was good. And that increased the project pool to 29. And how did we do that? We basically had to reduce funding on some of the larger dollar projects. So that's allowing us to fund projects that were greater than 90 million at about 31% of their total project cost. In addition to that, we took a couple of the projects and we're going to slide them over to the drinking water program and fund them with drinking water loan funds. And you see, if we had gone down to the 12s, it would have just put us way over our upper end. It would have been 1.7 billion, which far exceeds the amount of funds that we had available. So this slide just shows the same information in a different format. We ended up with scenario C. So everybody with a cutoff score of 13 is in, and they're on the fundable list. If you were a 12, unfortunately, you didn't make it. So that would include everybody that was a 15 and a 14 on down to 13. So additionally, we did some policy amendments recently, so just letting people know what's new. So obviously new is the priority scoring system. The eligible start date is a little new. We can now reach back to when recipients actually issue their notice to proceed. One cautionary tale there is to make sure that we're aware that you're going to do that, and then we'll make sure that our environmental staff have gotten through a certain percentage of their reviews. Basically, they have to be done with their reviews and all their consultations. Otherwise, it could become problematic, and it could be that we couldn't fund you at all. So on planning and design loans, we're doing what we call a restructure. We used to actually refinance planning and design loans into a construction loan, but we're not going to do that in the future. We're just going to restructure the planning and design loans to match the construction loan terms. So we've had a lot of questions about bridge financing here lately. So those are going to be an eligible cost. We ask that the applicant contact our office and let us know, and we'll work with them on that. So new project cost eligibility is now going to be, we can actually replace private laterals now. We can't make direct loans to homeowners, but we can to the larger agencies out there. Same thing with recycled water on-site retrofits. Those are now eligible as well. So one thing, principal forgiveness, we're not using that term anymore. We're going to start calling it non-repayable financing. We've got some new credit review processes. They'll be in the appendix of the new policy, Appendix N. Mainly, we changed the debt service coverage as well. So we increased senior and parity coverage from 1.1 to 1.2, but we lowered subordinate coverage to 1.0. I believe it used to be 1.1. And as was stated earlier about our forms, we're working on coming up with new forms. Don't let that hinder you from submitting an application. We will accept all the forms that are currently out there. Anything that we need, we will request it later. So as an incentive to go to a shorter term, we're going to have an interest rate reduction of 0.25% if you take a 20-year loan. So what stays the same? So we still have PF available for projects that were on last year's fundable list until that pot of money that we had assigned to that is used. Projects that are on the new fundable list would not be eligible for principal forgiveness for green projects. So we do offer a match financing as well. So that gets you an effective rate of 1.2 on a 30-year loan. Applications are continually accepted, but we do have a deadline for submitting information that you would like for us to use in the scoring process, and that's December 31st of each year. So just a statement, you know, fundable list, being placed on the fundable list doesn't mean it's a guarantee of funding, but it's a high likelihood that you will be funded as long as you meet all the eligibility criteria. Planning and design costs, we can reach back as far as you need to capture any costs that you incurred for the project, but they have to be documented. So implementation, so the idea here is to execute all of the agreements that are on all of the projects that are listed on the fundable list by June 30th of 2020. We'll see how we do. We didn't do as great as we wanted to this year, but hopefully we can get more efficiency in the next. So mid-year, we should be putting out an update to show progress on how we're doing in reaching that goal. And then we do also have our monthly status reports that are placed on the web. This is our basic schedule. We went out for comment on the 26th. Comments are due back on the 28th. And I realize that's a day after a holiday, so people may want to think about getting them in that week prior to the holiday, if possible. Like we've said, we're going to adopt the IUP and the fundable list at the June 18th meeting. So how do you comment? So we can take them written. Those should go to Janine Townsend, the clerk to the board. Their email address box there is commentletters@waterboards.ca.gov. There is a certain limit on attachments. If you have any issues with that, just give them a call and they'll help you through that process. If you have a courier coming, they need to check through the security in our office. And then, of course, oral comments are accepted as well at the June 18th board meeting. And again, those comments are due on May 28th by noon. And now we're here for questions.
We have one question here. Why does Clean Water SRF provide less grant dollars and principal forgiveness in relation to Drinking Water SRF? What happens to higher ranked projects that aren't funded, for example, projects in scenario A or B?
So as far as the projects in A or B, those are going to be, if we're going down to 13, everybody that's above that, 14 and 15, and if there was a 16, I don't think there was a 16, they're all going to be eligible. They will all be in the pool to be funded in the next fiscal year. And the reason for the difference in the principal forgiveness dollars, it's just we've always had a certain maximum of 4 or 5 million on principal forgiveness for green projects. I don't think there is a difference necessarily between the folks in Oswiz and Clean Water.
So I'm assuming the question is regarding how much is available for all projects. And so the first part of the equation is the two different programs. Clean Water, so Clean Water is one program. We get one grant from the federal government. Drink Water is a totally separate project. We get a different grant. So for principal forgiveness, they're completely separate. We get completely separate dollar amounts for those two programs. And then the other part of the equation is how much do we have in money from bond funds from the state. So Prop 1, Prop 68, drinking water. So on the drinking water side, we no longer have any funds available under Proposition 1. Clean Water, we do have Proposition 1 funds still available, not much, but a little bit. So that's part of what's in that equation. We also, on the Clean Water side, have what we call the Small Community Grant Fund, which is a fund that has been set up on that side that gives $8 million annually. It's only for clean water projects, cannot be used for drinking water projects. Drinking water, we have more demand, approximately double the amount of demand on the drinking water side as we do on the clean water side. And so once we take a look at all the projects and the demand, then we make a decision on which side do we propose to put the funds for those that can be allocated to either one, which this year was Prop 68. Prop 68 right now is proposed, and I believe it's in the governor's budget, is all going to drinking water. If you look, we have, I believe it's around $300 million in applications on the drinking water side, as on the clean water side, we have about half that amount. So when you take a look at those numbers and all the different funding sources that are coming in on clean water, it's, basically in the end, they're two different programs, different funding sources, and, different, in the end, it's going to be a different amount that's offered in funding for each program. Were there any other questions? Question from the audience? Okay, none from the audience. Okay, hand it over to Christopher here.
So this is a question from an agency that has, I guess, has been invited to submit a WIFIA loan. And then we've recommended them for partial funding, but that doesn't add up to 100%. And so we recognize that in some cases, yeah, we're not able to provide the difference between WIFIA and the total project cost. So our limitation was to that $1.25 billion in financing. So in order to do that, and to try to do that in as fair a way as possible, we set up the scoring and the ranking system. And so the idea, as Bob pointed out in one of the early slides there, is a couple of principles that we tried to follow. One is that we're going to draw a cutoff score based on the scoring. So you're either fundable or you're not fundable. We're going to draw the cutoff score at 14 or 13 or 12 or whatever the number is, and then everybody with that cutoff score or higher. So in this case, the recommendation is 13. So everybody that had a score of 13 or higher is fundable. They're placed on the fundable list. But in order to do that, the other part of that was, well, we had to come up with some of the projects, we had to limit partial funding. So whatever that number was, we back calculated that based on the 1.25 billion. So there were 5 projects, I think there were 5 projects under that scenario that in order to meet that target there, stay within that range, that 125% range, the number worked out to 31%. So that's what we're recommending to the board, is that those 5 projects receive what's on the fundable list there. Now, where the remainder of the financing comes from, I mean, that's something that you as the agency will have to try to figure out. No more questions, okay. Well, I don't want to rush anything. We'll hang out here for a few more minutes and see if there are more questions. Bill, did you have any questions? Okay. Well, thank you for coming. And everybody on the web, I'm not sure if we know how many at this point, but everybody that tuned in, we really appreciate you doing so. And we appreciate your questions. And like I say, we'll just hang out here for a few minutes, give people, maybe they're still typing into their email. One quick thing I did want to add to one of the comments that Bob made. Fundable is not a guarantee of funding. You have to meet all the eligibility criteria, but we also have to have the funds. So that could be a factor as well. Probably in particular, small disadvantaged and small severely disadvantaged community, you can look at the numbers yourself there, and as Nicole touched on, there's much more demand than there is funds. But the flip side of that is, don't let that stop you from submitting an application. Still submit the application, because bond measures get put on the ballot, or maybe the federal government will appropriate more money to the clean water or drinking water SRF programs, which will then give us more principal forgiveness. You never know. So it's best, if we don't have an application from you, well, then it's hard for us to know that you really need the funds. It's not that we don't know anything, but you do need to submit an application. And as the lady earlier said, do you need to submit a complete application right off the bat? No. You start an application and do the general package first and get your name in the system, get a project number, get a project manager assigned, get the process started. That way we can work you into the system. Anything more? No? Anything else you want to add, Nicole? No? Okay, well, again, thank you all for coming, and thank you for tuning in on the web. And certainly, if you do have questions later on, just a reminder, you can submit those if they're related to the drinking water program, drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov, and for clean water SRF, cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. Those are our general mailbox. They're always there. They weren't specifically created for this webinar. You can always send a question to those mailboxes. And of course, the deadlines, just a quick reminder on the deadlines. So for the clean water IUP, it's May 28th, noon. May 28th is the deadline to submit written comments. And then for the drinking water IUP, it's noon, June 6th to submit written comments. And then we will be going to the board at the June 18th board meeting to present the items, 2 items to the board for their consideration and hopefully adoption. So again, thank you everybody, and we will talk to you later. Oh, sorry, whoa. One more question, okay.
Do you have an idea of when fiscal will be fully implemented? Regarding the clean water SRF, is the leveraging limit of 2.2 billion enough if you consider the backlogged funding for agencies that have existing SRF agreements who have not received any reimbursement due to fiscal conversion delays?
Okay, saving the best for last. So let's take those, that's 2-part question. So let me deal with the first part. When do we expect fiscal to be fully implemented? Well, that's kind of a very broad question, and so our expectation is that during the next state fiscal year, we will be, to give a short answer to your question, to be fully implemented next state fiscal year. Now that's a whole year, sometime between July. I hate to tap dance around the answer, but it's not a cut and dried answer of, well, one day we're going to wake up and everything is fully implemented. The elephant is going through the snake as we speak. We've made a huge amount of progress in implementing fiscal, and so I couldn't say that, to give a rough figure, maybe we're halfway there, but I think during the next state fiscal year we're going to get to some new normal. Now that's the hard question to answer is, well, what does new normal look like? Because there's more work involved in using fiscal. We don't know exactly what new normal is going to be, but sometime within the next year I expect we'll get to a new normal. The second part of the question, so as I understand the question, is $2.2 billion leveraging authority, is that enough to provide the funds that have already been committed? Yes, that is enough. Now whether The ones that we're going to add to there, whether we'll need additional leveraging authority, we didn't think so at this point. That's why we're not also presenting an item to the board to increase that leveraging authority. But that doesn't have to be done at the time we do the IUP. That can be done at any point. Cash flow forecasting is very dynamic. And so at this point, our cash flow looks fine, and so we don't need additional funds. We thought we would sell clean water bonds this year, but we looked at the cash flow and we didn't need to do that. So at this point, we think $2.2 billion is enough leveraging authority for the clean water SRF. No more questions? Okay, again, those are general email boxes. Feel free to send an email to those email addresses at any time. And you can go on our website. There's a number of contact information there as well. So cleanwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov or drinkingwatersrf@waterboards.ca.gov. So with that, I think we're going to wrap it up for today. And again, thank you, everybody.